Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Emily Kuda, and I'm Percona's Senior Manager of Marketing Programs. We're going to get started in just a moment. For those of you that are joining us, I just want to remind you that you will be on mute during this discussion. If you have any questions during the webinar, go ahead and enter them down below in the questions field. At the end of the webinar, we'll take time to answer as many questions as we can. Also, a recording of this webinar and the slides will be made available to everyone within 48 hours or less. So with that said, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. We're going to be talking about forking or branching, lessons from the MySQL community, presented by Percona CEO and founder, Peter Zaitsev. Take it away, Peter.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. Thanks, Emily. Hey, everyone. And we'll talk about forking and branching in the MySQL community today. Now, I want to say at the start, what this is not going to be very technical webinar. We're going to talk about open source or approaches, right, to develop an open source software. But if you are looking for some recipes, how to optimize MySQL or scaling best practices, that is webinar is not about it. Another thing important to note is what I am not a lawyer, thankfully. And that means that when I'm talking about the semi-legal things like licenses or trademarks and so on and so forth, I'm going to share with you my understanding, but do not expect 100% correctness of the details, right? And if there are any people with a law degree attending this webinar, they'll probably will have to roll their eyes more than that than once in terms of my correctness, right, and how loose I interpret certain things. Also mind what laws in those areas can be slightly different worldwide, right? So that is another reason for you to make sure if you are thinking about any legal decisions or questions to look closely at your advisors in your country. Okay, so this is something you all probably know, right? Is if you look at from a very high level, we see different approaches to software development. There is a proprietary software, and there is an open source software. Now, if you look at the open source software, what is interesting in this case from about our angle is what if a proprietary software would be only one of few tightly controlled builds which exist. So, for example, if you are running, let's say, Windows, there are a number of builds created by Microsoft, right, for different versions, and then you would install and use one of them, right? You cannot create your own build, customize it, change it, and so on and so forth. There may be some partners, right, in a proprietary software world which can have their own software builds, but it is highly restricted, right, and defined by the commercial agreements. When it comes to open source software, then you can have as many builds and variants as possible, right? For a lot of open source software, you can go on a GitHub, you can create your own branch, apply a couple of patches, right, and then kick off the build process, and you'll have your own build, which is different. Now, another thing I want to tackle on the open source software is what if a source is available, that doesn't really mean a software is open source. And I think it is especially important in the recent years, when we can see there are more licenses being created which allow you to see the source, right, and maybe even use it in a certain ways, but do not really grant you all of the open source software freedoms. A lot of this, I think, was started back in 2001, right, when the Microsoft was starting the first kind of paying attention to open source movement, and they had this shared source license in 2001, which allows certain people to see the source, but not really otherwise much usable. If you look at the recent developments over the last year or two, we can have we see the source like a business source license, which is something MariaDB uses. And for MariaDB uses for certain components, not for server, right? To be clear, which is sort of like a time-delayed open source license where you cannot really freely use it until a certain amount of years passes. Or many of you perhaps heard the news about Redis Labs relicensing certain models with Apache 2 license with commons clause. And that commons clause, while it looks like a small addition, actually completely changes their license and converts that from their the open source license to the highly restricted license in terms of what you are about what you can do with the software, especially whose help you can enroll to help you to support and extend the software. Now, when you look at the open source, it's also important to understand the difference between license and a trademark. The open source licenses, they give you right to modify and redistribute software, but they do not talk about the trademark. So you do not necessarily have a right to do that under original name. So let's look at about in MySQL. That's probably a very good example, right? Everyone can go ahead and take the MySQL source code under GPL license, do whatever you want to do, rip off parts of it, add some of your own code, and release your work, but you cannot call that MySQL, right, from a trademark reasons. That is one of the reasons, for example, MariaDB is called MariaDB, right? Percona has a Percona server for MySQL, right? Not something as a MySQL, right, or better MySQL, right, whatever name you could come up with. And there we'll see some other names, Drizzles, WebScale SQL, number of other derivatives which will have all the different names, not the MySQL itself, and a lot of that for trademark reasons. When you talk about those the open source software and derivatives, we often talk about the upstream, right? And the upstream is the source, right, from which we base our software for. So if you don't think about MySQL ecosystem, let's take Linux ecosystem, for example. You would find Red Hat, Ubuntu, right? Pretty much every distribution out there, they apply some custom patches, right, to the kernel. But at the same time, they all see the kernel as an upstream that they all merge changes which come in the official kernel version, and they often would contribute a lot of patches back to the upstream. And this is very important because upstream, at large extent, is what defines their what helps to ensure comparability, right? And that's what makes software particular version of a software. So if you look at the types, how we can go about building the new software version, which is based on something which existed before, right? And we can go into a few different ways. And I think it's very interesting to see in MySQL ecosystem, all of them has been tried. In case of fork, you take on software, right, which is based on the original upstream, but it does not merge it. Anymore. Right. So, for example, in the case of MariaDB, MariaDB forked the MySQL at the certain certain version, right? And for that time, we have continued merges at some point in time. But then in the latest version with MariaDB 10, there are no more complete merge from MySQL versions. There are just some features being cherry-picked, but in the end, those are two projects which have completely developed on their own path. Now, you can also think about their kind of branch, right? Or I'm not sure what is exactly the most commonly used term for that. That's what I just going to call it myself. And in this case, that would be something like the Linux kernels as used by different Linux distributions, right? Or as a Percona server and MySQL, where we are going to be always taking changes from upstream on a regular basis, and then often provide their changes back the changes back as well. Okay, so also often we talk about the small changes which can be applied as a patches, and they can be seen pretty much for security and compatibility. Sometimes the process may be here what the actual the branches are created. Sometimes the patches are so small they even may not live in the same repository, but may be applied as a part of a build process, right? So, for example, to make less code changes. If you look at the MySQL ecosystem, then we would have the first third-party MySQL variant was this the NewSphere, right? The NewSphere was then this new commercial edition, right, which was called MySQL Advantage, which, as you can see from this, the announcement would have transaction supported before InnoDB was available, and that is something which would be available, right, for you for only about $300 an instance. Now, this first variant really has some dark history attached to that. There was a lot of there was a lawsuit both from NewSphere sued MySQL, and MySQL sued back on based on the trademark violations, GPL violation, and fair business practice. So that was kind of like a very complicated lawsuit. Well, but the fact is, in the end, MySQL won the suit, right, and this product was no more. Now, in general, besides NewSphere, in the early MySQL days, we pretty much had a very single MySQL tree with very unified community. Now, in reality, is the different Linux distributions would apply the small patch for their builds, right? Sometimes adding some functionality they thought is appropriate. Sometimes it was for security and other reasons, but those have been relatively small changes. Now, the big change for MySQL ecosystem came in 2005. In 2005, Oracle acquired Innobase, and Innobase is a company which creates InnoDB as a storage engine, right? And that was a big shock for MySQL ecosystem, because at that time it was clear what the majority of high-value production MySQL deployments were already using InnoDB rather than MySQL storage engines. And I would say for many, probably the fact what storage engine is in a DB was even more important than the MySQL layer on top of that. So what happened from that is there was a lot of work internally in a MySQL to figure out how to create alternative to the InnoDB storage engine, right? Because you don't want to have a your biggest competitor kind of owning the most important or one of the most important part of your software. And with that, also we had a lot of kind of push on not really looking to innovate InnoDB in MySQL, right? Some of us may remember there was for years InnoDB, which was built in MySQL, which was kind of crappy, and there was additional plugin you can go and download from Innobase, which was better. The next step was another acquisition. A few years later, Sun acquired MySQL AB. That was a kind of unexpected outcome because at that time there was all assumption what MySQL would go IPO instead, but I guess Sun offered their more money than MySQL would have raised on IPO at that time, and that was a good exit for everyone. At that time, this competition with Oracle continues. And as we now have a number of years where InnoDB was quite neglected, we released Percona XRDB, which was a variant of InnoDB storage engine, which we enhanced with better performance and some other improvement. Also, in 2008, there is another fork appeared for MySQL, which was called Drizzle. And this was MySQL fork by Brian Aker, who was one of the lead architects of MySQL in its early days before Sun. And that was really focused on building a kind of more simplified, clean database for web and a cloud. Really try to strip off as much stuff as possible from MySQL, put it in the plugin, gets very clean design, and focus on web and the cloud. With that, there was no focus on MySQL compatibility. The idea would be you would use different drivers, right, and not all the SQL syntax features which MySQL supports would work. And there was a lot of community work at the Drizzle for a few years, but in the end, as we know, this project fizzled. In 2009, we have another big fork started, which was MariaDB, right? And this fork started as with Oracle acquiring MySQL. The Monty has decided it's very important to have the MySQL fork, MySQL version, which is not dependent on the Oracle, which there was rumors at that time that Oracle may make MySQL a closed source. As we know, nothing of the sort happened, but well, that was a rumor still. The MariaDB in initial versions, MariaDB 5.1, for example, started with very minor improvements in MySQL, and that was pretty much drop-in compatible database. But of course, a lot of the things are very different now. In 2009 and 2010, right? That is when the deal of Oracle buying Sun was announced, and then it was later closed. And I think that was a big shock for MySQL ecosystem, and both for a lot of people out of MySQL and as well as working for MySQL at the time. Because I haven't been with MySQL for a few years at the time the Sun bought Oracle, but I know in the MySQL early days, the Oracle was essentially the enemy number one. We at MySQL, they're out there to go get Oracle and democratize the database market. And so Oracle owning MySQL, that was quite a shock to us, all. From our side, we saw this as an opportunity, right? And also we saw the need because as we innovated our work, we had to go beyond the Percona storage engine, and that was actually very inconvenient for our customers to get their MySQL server and then replace that with the proper binary of Percona XRDB. So in the end, we released Percona server, which is focused on a little bit different market. Our focus was always full MySQL comparability, and we provide an open source enterprise features and have a focus on observability and enterprise features. Now, at that time, we had also more innovation starting to happen in the MySQL space in terms of development. MySQL was at this time very actively used by at least a decade, but this is the time when we started to see the third party to contribute and innovate. With Jeremy Cole and Proven Scaling, he had a number of very helpful patches for performance and observability. We also have Google, the very heavily MySQL users at that time would have some patches for MySQL, and there also were our Delta, which the MySQL distribution with Aryan Lens compiling a number of third parties in this our Delta MySQL distribution. From other dimension, there also were MySQL forks which have been created for analytical purpose. We had the InfoBright and InfiniDB, which were column stores which would use some of the MySQL functionality, right? You'll talk MySQL protocol, but at the same time, we would pretty much rip off a lot of the lower levels of MySQL and implement their own optimizer and execution, right? Because you just have to do that if you are building column store, right? And especially the distributed storage engines. Yeah. With those two, I think InfoBright, if I remember correctly, they ended up moving their technology later on their on the PostgreSQL top level framework, because it was well, the GPL license, right, and what Oracle would require for them to keep those pieces of MySQL code was not practical. And InfiniDB, or the CalPont technology, which provided that, unfortunately went under, and then the sort of the abundant open source code was picked up by MariaDB, and it now has a second life as MariaDB column store. This also was the time when we had a lot of private MySQL variants created by a lot of large companies for their own use. As I mentioned, Google had some patches for MySQL. Facebook had their own branch of MySQL with a lot of changes. There was at the time Twitter's MySQL, Yahoo MySQL, LinkedIn, eBay. There are the public branch exists by AliSQL, Tencent, right? And there are probably other companies which have created their own MySQL variants. Now you would ask why, right? Why would you really do those things on your own with your private branch? Well, the reason is at a certain scale, it really makes sense for you to optimize the infrastructure you have for your particular needs, being that performance optimization for your specific workloads, hardware, deployment style, or even optimizing for needs of your developers, right? And establishing better connection with your infrastructure. So obviously you can move a lot faster if it's only yourself you have to think about, right? Trying to contribute all the patches to upstream can be hard, and especially some of them wouldn't apply in its current form, right? For example, when you have something which is very tightly integrated with some other components in your infrastructure which other people won't need, or they may not be open source. Now it's it's good to note what the MySQL was not the only component. There was a lot of companies innovated. So, for example, if you look at Facebook, they would have the team working on the improving Linux kernel for their needs. They would have their own fork for of Memcache, and also Facebook would produce a lot of completely the open source projects completely from scratch, right? Like the RocksDB, which we now incorporate as MyRocks storage engine, is a project for at Facebook, and there are many others. Now, with a lot of those patches at the same time, you have to pay the price. The more patches you have, the harder it becomes to maintain, right? Because with minor releases, you have to do the merges, and which are not always trivial. But especially with the major releases, oh my gosh, that is where you have to really do a lot of work. So there was an attempt a few years back to unify the MySQL patches which are needed, but those groups run in MySQL on a very high scale. Facebook, Google, LinkedIn, Twitter, Alibaba Group, they get together to have this web scale SQL MySQL variant, right, which included patches which all of them agreed were helpful, and each of them still continue to have their own fork, but that was based on the web scale SQL as an upstream instead of MySQL. The idea was also to send the patches to upstream, which is MySQL, from web scale SQL when possible. Unfortunately, for various reasons, ranging from technical to legal reasons, this hasn't really lasted for very long, and we don't really hear about the web scale SQL that much anymore. So as we mentioned, the maintenance is a really big issue or question when you are working with such a code, right? So often when you speak about the features, especially minor ones, it can be very easy to create. But the cost of maintaining them to give them upstream with their upstream, especially major versions, that's maybe multiple times more expensive over years than the originally created there. So if you have a patches, it's very and which solve your needs, often it's a very good idea to contribute them to upstream. Even if you maintain your own fork for some reason, it's still good to contribute features to upstream. So that means you have to have a smaller change set to maintain. Now you would see from upstream contributions, and I would say in MySQL there are two big main upstreams out there, MySQL and MariaDB. And you can contribute to both of them, right? Or there are some rumors out there that Oracle is not really looking to accept the contributions. That is not correct. You'll have Oracle SLA required. Right, and last time I checked, there have been more than 2,500 signatures on this agreement, including Percona. We contribute a lot of features and especially bug fixes to Oracle. I should say though, what Oracle CLA is considered toxic by lawyers of some companies, and these are typically the companies which have some big beef with the Oracle, right? So for example, Google had a lot of Android lawsuits with Oracle going on, right? And that cast a lot of shades on having some other documents, right, when they may be given some property to Oracle. In terms of MariaDB, it is lighter. You can either have my MariaDB contributor agreement, or if you have a new BSD license code, you can simply contribute that as a code under BSD license without sharing any specific contributor agreement. Now with those, you may ask, okay, well, Peter, but what about Percona? Right, at Percona, we upstream from MySQL. So that means in many cases, it's if patches are meaningful, it's much better to get them contributed to Oracle, and then that's would be appear in Percona server as well. Now, if for some reason it cannot be contributed to Oracle, right, or would you like to contribute at Percona, you can do that as well. But at the same time, we are very selective in terms of what contributions we accept because of our focus. We want to make sure the patches we accept, they never ever break compatibility, because the compatibility with Oracle's MySQL is a non-negotiable value proposition for us. And we also want to make sure those changes are not very expensive for us to maintain over long term, or if they are, then we really provide a huge value, right? So we are taking a very practical approach, because we want to make sure we are spending our limited engineering resources appropriately. Now, outside of those public forks, which are open source, and you often find them on GitHub and some other places, we see what the MySQL is available as database as a server on pretty much all major clouds. And in most cases, you would see there are at least one, maybe even several forks which exist in this cloud environment, and those forks are would not be open source. So the most famous one is probably Amazon Aurora MySQL, or Amazon Aurora with MySQL compatibility. And that has a lot of very serious changes compared to baseline MySQL. And we can see a lot of those started from sort of like a storage level, having a very optimized InnoDB storage level layer, which kind of use completely different storage mechanics and really integrates very well with cloud storage. But then from that, it expanded to really have a different optimizer, GIS, some other features integrating with Amazon cloud infrastructure, and so on and so forth. Right. And what is interesting from that is what we can see, what the porting is not easy. Right. The more changes you implement, the harder it is to catch up. So we can see what MySQL 5.7 compatibility, right, for Aurora was released just in 2018, and that is more than 2 years after MySQL was released with GA. And even if that release, some of the features have to be disabled, like performance schema has been is currently disabled in 5.7 comparability mode because it has been causing some issues. And that to me is a great indication to see what even such great companies like Amazon, who have fantastic engineering team and in general show a lot of ability to get things done, they find this maintaining comparability, right, and porting changes quite hard. Okay, now, so if you're looking at the open source variants right now, what exists out there? What are your really choices which are designed to be used by their end users? These are MySQL, MariaDB, and Percona products such as Percona Server for MySQL and its cluster and sibling Percona XRB cluster. If you look at the difference between those, is MySQL is by far the most widely used version out there, and it is based on the open core model. So in addition to the community version, there is enterprise version exists with advanced features both through a server plugin as well as some various tools, software, support subscription, and so on and so forth. MariaDB has been really focused on their on the community, if you will, right? Accepting contributions, including community in a more collaborative development. And the great thing also about MariaDB, they implemented a number of very advanced SQL features focused on comparability with Oracle. So if you are really looking to migrate your Oracle applications, right, and looking for something in MySQL space which is most compatible with Oracle, then MariaDB can be a good choice. The downside, of course, it is a less and less MySQL competitive with each release. With MariaDB 10.3 and MySQL 8, which are the most recent, they are very incompatible, right? Not just in terms of the differences in many SQL syntaxes, but a lot of other things like the on data format is the on disk data format is now is very different, right? So you cannot go back and forth as easily as before. And in Percona Server, as I mentioned, we focus on complete MySQL compatibility. We focus on small and highly valuable improvements. For example, you should not expect Percona Server to come with a completely different optimizer, because you know what? You can't really replace optimizer and be completely compatible, right? That is just not practical. We focus a lot of performance optimization, and we also provide TokuDB and MyRocks storage engines, which MySQL doesn't have. They are also available in MariaDB though, as well as some other systems. Now, I mentioned MySQL. MariaDB is separate database, right, and very different. And over the last few days, actually, we had a blog post which was, claiming exactly that. And in that blog post and also on that website, there was nice feature comparisons, not just between MySQL and MariaDB, but also between other database systems. And what you can see from those is you can see there are differences. In certain cases, you would see there are certain features which exist in MySQL and not MariaDB. Certain features exist in MariaDB and not in MySQL, right? But hey, in the end, there are a lot of differences. Well, with that, I also wanted to remind everybody what Percona Live in Europe is just about 10 weeks away, and we would very much encourage you to get your ticket soon if you are interested in the best prices. And otherwise, see you in Frankfurt, and we'll cover MySQL, MariaDB, and many other open source databases in a great level of detail. Thank you, and I'm happy to take a few questions.
Thank you so much for that, Peter. At this time, go ahead and enter your questions now in the questions panel down below. As a friendly reminder, we're going to take time to answer as many questions as we can. So one of our questions, when does Percona plan to release Percona server for MySQL 8?
Yes, well, as I mentioned, porting changes is not easy, even if you try to minimize the changes. So we are working on MySQL or for Percona server on MySQL 8, and you should see their better build available within I think the next 2 or 3 weeks, and then their GA release will follow that shortly. Depends on the testing results.
Thank you. Our next question is, hey Peter, this is Jean Francis here. Some people are forking Percona software like Extra Backup and Extra DB. What would you like them to do?
Oh, okay. Well, I think that is a good question, right? Yes. So we like to see their people contributing to the Percona software, and frankly, that has been done in number of cases. And we look closely when it's reasonable for us to accept those patches. In some cases, there changes which somebody wants to do may not be what how we would like to solve this problem, right? Then we don't include them, and we have no problem if somebody chooses to fork and maintain their version which works in the way they are. I think that is exactly is a way of open source. Now, like for example, you mentioned Maria Backup, right? In reality, is the on-disk layout has becoming so different between MySQL and MariaDB. It's becoming increasingly impractical to try to maintain those things in the same binary, right? So it does to make sense what you have a different tool, right, which tailored specifically for their given software version.
I forgot to elaborate on that. In terms of contributing upstream, etc.
Yes, yeah. Thank you. So again, in our case, we would like we are very welcome to get the patches, and for those tools like Percona, the extra backup, right? We are there are no upstream to us, right? There are upstream for some portions, like the base Percona extra backup on the InnoDB, which comes from MySQL, but there is no upstream. There is, of course, the similar tool which exists in the MySQL space, MySQL Enterprise Backup, but that is obviously a commercial tool, and Oracle wouldn't be accept their Percona extra backup from us, right? To say, hey guys, you know what? Just take this and make it open source as your official backup solution, right? That just doesn't fit a business with a business strategy here.
Thank you. Our next question is the same fork scenario applies to other open source such as like Magento?
Oh, well, I would say because of its kind of long history, right, and it's right of a lot of those twists and turns. The MySQL is somewhat unique. Well, I wouldn't say unique, right? It's somewhat exceptional. A lot of other open source projects may not have as many forks. There are other forks, of course, exist, right? I cannot comment specifically on what you refer in Magento. I'm not very familiar with that ecosystem. We can look at another example, like in terms of OpenOffice and LibreOffice, right? We see the forked happen out there and being quite quite successful. Even in the Linux ecosystem, right? We can see there is Debian, right? And on a Debian we have Ubuntu based on a lot of that code base, and then on Ubuntu there are a lot of other small distributions which based on Ubuntu and improve and extend, right, to customize that. So I think this open source, the relationship, right, and what happened in terms of forks, branches, variants is really going to be different depending on open source ecosystem you're looking at.
Thank you. Let's see. Our next question is: what impact will there be on dev groups that utilize MySQL and RHEL 6, and then move forward to RHEL 7, which now embeds MariaDB 5.5? And as you mentioned, MariaDB is starting to deviate more and more from MySQL.
Well, the reality is this, right? I mean, I think you mentioned a very interesting point, right? With the RHEL 7, right, it includes MariaDB 5.5. But MariaDB 5.5 is very, very outdated, right? So so unless you are really running some of the trivial the trivial workloads, you are probably going to replace that with another MySQL versions, right? Being that MySQL Community, MariaDB, or Percona server, right? Now, in reality, I would say what a lot of the recent rise in popularity of MariaDB has happened because they really have won their distribution game, right, with a lot of Linux distributions, right? In my personal opinion, I don't think that was done for the good reason. I think in many cases that was done using the, scare tactics against Oracle. Hey guys, you have to move to MariaDB because Oracle will kill MySQL soon anyway. In some other cases, that was also a lot of the kind of big business questions and practices, right? So, for example, you guys may know what with Oracle's Unbreakable Linux, right? There is not much love spent, love lost, right, between Oracle and Red Hat. So it's very natural for Red Hat to choose something which is not MySQL, right, for their version, right? I don't necessarily think that is a good for user. I know a lot of people have to go through extreme pains in upgrades and because the compatibility was broken, and I also believe that was a very bad business by a lot of distributions, which instead of just saying, hey guys, you know, there is this much better database called MariaDB, right? We recommend you to use that, or we recommend you to use Postgres, right, or something else, which would be a natural thing to do. We just replaced MySQL with MariaDB, right? And in some cases, when you ask for MySQL, you get MariaDB installed, which is kind of a very bizarre approach to do. So yeah, that's my 2 cents, or more than 2 cents on it.
Thank you. At this time, let's see. Oh, sorry. There's a comment here. Hold on. You did not mention the Percona fork of Galera extra DB cluster. Is that a fork or a variant branch or a patch, and why?
Yeah.
Also, can you expect a fork or a patch of proxy SQL in the near future? If yes, why? You know, if not, you know.
Okay, so that is a good question. So yes, I focus in this case on the Percona server, which is indeed the drop-in replacement for MySQL. Percona XRDB cluster is kind of a clustering sibling of Percona server, right? Which integrates Percona server as upstream with the replication technology from CoderShip, which is called Galera. And in this case, you can see we have more than one upstream in a sense. So we take their Galera libraries, right, from CoderShip. We at Percona test them, you know, harder them. We do performance improvements on them, and we contribute the codes back to Galera, right? In this case, and that's how it works. In terms of proxy SQL, we do support proxy SQL, right? As a product with Percona, we ship it from our repository, so that is the most common way to deploy Percona XRDB cluster as well. But at the same time, we are not forking it at this point, and we don't have plans to do that because we, in general, prefer to work with the open source communities to work together on a product or project, and only do a fork if there are some some differences which makes it impossible to do otherwise. So, for example, for Percona server, as I mentioned, we give a lot of patches. Like, frankly, I told Oracle guys, hey, if there's any patches you want from Percona server, go ahead and take it, right? But obviously, a lot of our equivalents with for enterprise features are not going to be taken by Oracle, right? For commercial reasons.
Thank you. Let's see. I'm just gonna wait. All right. Okay, so it looks like actually we have now gone through all of the questions. I'm going to give everybody 5 minutes back in their day. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending today. We hope to see you on future webinars. Thank you so much, Peter, for presenting today.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for all your insightful questions today.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, thanks.